The Rotoworld Football crew is back this time, taking a microscope to our wide receiver rankings. Some might call them wide receivers, the lifeblood of fantasy football. And to me, it's never felt like a deeper group or ones I want to pick from than this year. Let's start off with our first tier. Almost universally, we have it: Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Julio Jones, and DeAndre Hopkins as the top five, except he himself, Patrick Daugherty, has DeAndre Hopkins as his number 2 wide receiver. Pat, why so much conviction?
Well, it begins with faith in the player. And, I saw this week the good Lord Evan Silva, ex-Rotoworlder, has DeAndre Hopkins as his wide receiver 14, based on worry over wide receivers changing teams, which is a well-documented phenomenon. They do tend to post worse statistics in their first year with a new team. But, to me, there's a big difference between something like Tyrell Williams going to the Raiders, like a decrepit Chad Ochocinco going to the Patriots, than there is for someone like DeAndre Hopkins, a singular talent, going to the Arizona Cardinals. And wide receivers do often struggle in the first year with their new teams, but it's not like we have no examples of them not. Robert Woods, the Rams, just happened. Emmanuel Sanders to the Broncos just happened. Randy Moss, I don't know if anyone's heard of him, to the Patriots, that happened. And DeAndre Hopkins isn't quite a Mossian talent, but, he's an alpha wide receiver 1. And he's going to an offense, too, that wants to be as simple as possible, wants to make life easy for its weapons, get out there in 4 wide receiver sets and run. An offense that we know wants to be amongst the league leaders in pass attempts, that I think we all kind of expect to probably hopefully attempt 50 to 60 more passes this season than they did last year. Most of all, an offense that they want to be all that pass heavy. They want to have all those targets, but they were starved for quality targets. They desperately needed someone like DeAndre Hopkins, and they went out and aggressively addressed it. And I just think he's such a good fit with Kyler Murray's skill set too, his body control along the sideline, and a lot of faith in the player, a lot of faith in the scheme. And I'm not expecting nearly as much target regression as a lot of other people are too. And clearly I could be wrong, but to me, I think a lot of people are overthinking DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals.
And to stick up for you for a second, Pat, it's not like he was used optimally last year with the Houston Texans. Like, he kind of was used as this volume-based wide receiver.
He was used as Julian Edelman.
Yeah, an average depth of target of like 10.5, if not lower than that. So it's a situation where we saw Cliff Kingsbury really maximize the talents he had last year and the deficiencies he had last year. Well, guess what? If he can just unleash DeAndre Hopkins to an even more of those vertical passes this year compared to what he was allowed to do last year, I think the ceiling is really quite high, despite the other pass-catching weapons the Cardinals do have. Daigle, we do have Devontae Adams as the site's number 2 wide receiver. It's interesting. We had a quarterback conversation a little bit earlier, and it's weird to have a quarterback conversation heading into a season where we don't even mention Aaron Rodgers, but we just did that. So then why does Devontae Adams make up our number 2 spot?
I think we should be talking about Devontae Adams because he has a path to become the number 1 wide receiver and knock down Michael Thomas. I haven't had the courage to pull the trigger on that ranking just yet, but there is a clear path here because he missed 4 games last year, and yet the 127 targets and 83 catches and 997 receiving yards he produced were the second highest marks in his career and only year 1 under Matt LaFleur. So I assume his team high 31% target share from last year is not only safe to sustain in 2020, but perhaps increase, and he can lead the league in target share with all the question marks around him. It is well known the Packers didn't add another receiver. So while we argue about who we should draft in later rounds as Allen Lazard or Jay Sternberger, the list goes on, the answer could just be, hey, more targets, even more, go to Devontae Adams, and thus makes him the number 1 wide receiver overall.
Hayden, do Tyreek Hill or Julio Jones have a chance to unseat Michael Thomas here as well?
I'd be kind of surprised if I was going to choose, it would just be Julio Jones, just because we've seen it more consistently over the longer stretch of time. Plus, Tyreek Hill doesn't get quite as many targets as Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, and Michael Thomas. So, yeah, I think Julio Jones maybe isn't as sexy as Devontae Adams, and maybe isn't as sexy as Michael Thomas just because of the numbers over the last 2 years. But Julio Jones is still a lock to be like 1,300 plus yards, 100 catches this year, and maybe finally he'll catch some positive touchdown regression.
Let's go to
Julio
that next.
Jones is like guaranteed to get 1,400 yards. That's like what he does. And just real quick, when it comes to DeAndre Hopkins versus Devontae Adams, I just still have more faith in DeAndre Hopkins' ceiling. We've really only seen one ceiling year ever from Devontae Adams, who has only one 1,000-yard season ever. He's about to be 28 years old. Has a little bit of an injury history. I mean, missed the 4 games last year. It wasn't the first time he's missed time with injury. Just there's not really a negative argument to be made for Devontae Adams, but just as part of my positive argument for DeAndre. That's why I would rather bet on DeAndre's ceiling than Devontae's ceiling. But yeah, Julio Jones, if he ever scored touchdowns, I mean, he'd be in that number because, I mean, he metronome for 1,400 yards. And 1,400 yards is like a pretty rare line, actually, for receivers. Not many receivers reach that, and he does it every year.
I am not in the post-Hopkins outside of the wide receiver 1 range argument, but I think we should be wary of the bucket he's entering whenever a wide receiver changes teams in the offseason. Very quickly, Blair Andrews of RotoViz did some work here. And in the last decade alone, 77 wide receivers averaged at least 10 fantasy points per game in a season and then changed teams. And only 26% of those 77 improved their per game production output the following year. That doesn't mean Hopkins can't do it. It just means you have to know the hill you are willing to climb, whether you're betting his season-long prop or ranking him high, because you're trying to buck a particular trend.
And I know I was kind of pitting player against player there just a little bit, but obviously, since we all rank these guys as top 5 wide receivers, we overwhelmingly love each as a player and like their situation this year. But if you're going to start with 2 running backs in your drafts, which I know a lot of people out there are, often you aren't going to hit on those wide receivers. So let's jump to that next tier that make up 6 through 16 for us. Names like Chris Godwin to Adam Thielen to Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper. These are a lot of the names that we are going to draft. Daigle, when you're on the clock and even more names than the ones I just mentioned are available, which receiver are you going to prioritize?
I am a big fan of the Lions offense. If you go back and watch the quarterback video, given the splits that they had on a per production basis with Stafford under center. And that's why I'm chasing Kenny Golladay, because he led the league in 20-yard targets, downfield targets, and finished second in end zone targets while Stafford was under center. And those marks, for whatever reason, are being used against him in the industry just because he likely won't see as many raw targets as, let's say, Adam Thielen or Allen Robinson, which fall on the same tier. But those fruitful ones, the downfield ones that are volatile, those are the ones I want to chase because they don't necessarily have to go backwards, especially given the talent and the production that Golladay has sustained in the red zone, because he always gets those looks. And so they can go the opposite way as well. Yes, he already led the league in touchdowns, but with 16 games from Stafford, I want to see the ceiling if perhaps that production doesn't regress. So I love Galladay's ceiling, and that's why I'm chasing his upside.
Hayden, there are 2 Tampa Bay Buccaneers in this tier. Mike Evans, who we have as the wide receiver 10, and Chris Godwin, who we have as the wide receiver 6. That, in many ways, is a reflection on their 2019 seasons. That 2019 season was with Jameis Winston working in a lot of negative game script, kind of doing some YOLO ball and just throwing it up to his playmakers who could make plays. What's your confidence level in Godwin and Evans' ability to make good on the values of where they're being drafted right now?
I think both of them could be top 16 wide receivers, but banking on both of them being top 10 is not something I'm going to be willing to do. And I think it's just like you mentioned, it's just the differences between Tom Brady and Jameis Winston. So basically what we have to do here is we have to believe, is the air yards, how often they're throwing downfield, does that belong to the quarterback? Does that matter just because it's a scheme thing, or is that a wide receiver thing? And I think that it's probably a little bit of a mixture of both. I don't think that the difference between Jameis Winston and Tom Brady is like that drastic where you can completely fade either of them. But picking Chris Godwin as like the 23rd, 24th overall player is pretty rich for me. I think that they're both going to be fine, but paying off and winning your league type of picks, I'm not sure they're going to get there just because they're both so good.
Let's jump to the next tier. Wide receiver 17 through wide receiver 26. There's a lot of uncertainty here, Pat, but I think everyone's going to kind of have their favorites. Let me first focus on a little bit on the uncertainty. You know, AJ Brown, I think, is a rare talent during his rookie season, but most likely his yards after the catch, which he was crazy in last season, is going to regress. Keenan Allen, who has been a consistent fantasy force in previous years, is now locked in with Tyrod Taylor. can Cortland Sutton and Devontae Parker follow up their breakout 2019s? Pat, if I asked you to pick a name in this group, again, wide receiver 17 to wide receiver 26, that could vault into the top 12 wide receivers by season's end, who would it be?
On talent alone, I wish I could say it would be Cortland Sutton, but I just think he reminds me of almost like DeAndre Hopkins, as just someone who can succeed in any scheme with any quarterback. There's just too many moving parts there for me. A new play caller, a completely new supporting cast, the quarterback in Drew Lock, who he didn't post the best numbers with last year. It only has 5 games with, and then no offseason reps. So if it was just talent, I'd be saying Cortland Sutton, or probably maybe even DK Metcalf, but still the Tyler Lockett situation there. I can't quite discern what to do there. I think it's probably Terry McLaurin, who we just saw basically do special things as a rookie and just got tripped up by minor injuries and terrible quarterback play. And, there's nowhere to send these targets in the Washington offense. And just based on how Terry McLaurin immediately lived up to like his, pre-draft skill set, he was the player on the field that he was on paper, and just the complete lack of places to funnel these targets in this offense. Or I think Terry McLaurin could make that jump into the top 12. Maybe not fairly. I was going to say fairly easily. That might be overstating it, but it's very easy to see this happening.
I'll drive that home. I think he will be a top 12 wide receiver this year. And because you look at the coaching staff he has now, it was the same exact one basically that was in Carolina last season. An offense that gave DJ Moore top 10 target volume last season. In fact, DJ Moore saw about 40 extra targets than Terry McLaurin did last year. And I mean, that was with bad quarterback play in Kyle Allen, who worst case scenario is going to be the quarterback for Terry McLaurin. And if he's not, that means Dwayne Haskins is playing at a level above. And there is absolutely no one who Scott Turner is going to sit there and say, okay, who do I need to force feed the ball who is not named Terry McLaurin? Like Scott, if he's good at anything so far as an NFL play caller, is getting the ball in the hands of the player he wants to get the ball in the hands to. And that has to be Terry McLaurin this season. All right, Daigle, that's 2 in the corner of Terry. Who are you going to nominate here?
Well, I want to be in the corner of Terry, but
I want to quadruple down on this too. I'm in.
To be fair,
we have him in the wrong tier. Basically, we probably need to move him to the second tier.
Okay, I have one person that's probably controversial over him, but I think both of them rise to wide receiver 1 levels, or at least rival each other, because I'm still high on DJ Shark. I think DJ Shark makes the talent leap as Chris Godwin, who we talked about earlier, did for the Bucs last year. That's DJ Shark this year, who led the entire team in target share while Gardner Minshew was under center. And the Jags have the 4th softest projected passing schedule on the year. Laviska Shenault, 75% of his production came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage per Pro Football Focus last year. So he's not going to take away from Shark's downfield presence and targets and his rapport, which has already been established with Minshew, now entering his 2nd year. So I love DJ Shark this year.
I can guarantee that Leonard Fournette is not going to see the same amount of targets that he saw last year either. Exactly. Hayden Winks, your nomination is?
It would be Terry McLaurin. I'm going to pivot to T.Y. Hilton, who's a little bit lower on this list than other players like Terry McLaurin. But I think that you're getting a better quarterback situation in Indianapolis this year. Even if Philip Rivers has he's like getting close to running on empty, I think that T.Y. Hilton said he was healthy. I think that he is still a great talent overall. And I think that the passing volume is going to be there. The Colts wanted to hide Jacoby Brissett last year. That's why they were really low in pass attempts. I think that number is going to climb a little bit. And they have the easiest schedule in the league, a great offensive line. They play in the dome. The division's bad. So I think that there's a good chance that T.Y. Hilton becomes an every week wide receiver too.
If T.Y. Hilton was featured in Game of Thrones, he would be dubbed the breaker of tears, because he's right there smack in the middle of like the Devontae Parker, Marquise Brown range. The issue is, and this is so important for your drafts, you have got to pay attention how healthy he is in practice, because we don't know about this quote unquote minor hamstring injury suffered while training ahead of camp. And the thing is, he's talking about it as if it is a bigger deal than we are expecting. Like, he doesn't know when he's going to return, and he expects himself to return no matter what, which is a big issue because there's a difference in him returning at 100% and him returning just to be the Iron Man he is. And that would lead to his production like he had last year when he continued to try to play through injury, and we just kept on starting him and him not reaching expectations. So we have to be concerned about T.Y. Hilton as well.
Big picture on the Colts, though. I mean, so many words have been spent on the Buccaneers this offseason, and for good reason. I mean, when you bring in maybe the greatest quarterback of all time and Tom Brady, and Rob Gronkowski comes out of retirement, yes, that's a lot of positivity. Would not be shocking if the Indianapolis Colts outperform them this year and you can get every single one of their players at a discounted draft price than you can for the Bucs. I mean, I would even throw out someone like Paris Campbell. I know we're not in this conversation yet, but as someone who is barely being drafted in your leagues out there, who I wouldn't be surprised in week 1, week 2, week 3 goes on and has far more production than we're expecting. All right. So that basically does it for the top 24 wide receivers, the wide receiver 1s and the wide receiver 2s. I want to put everyone else in a bin. Pat, who is the one player that we have not mentioned at the wide receiver position that we must mention before we exit this conversation?
I think it's Marquise Brown, who flashed a little of not just game break, almost like league breaking upside last year, and a special player playing with a special quarterback, the MVP, put in a situation to do what he does best and to do it every week, and very little target competition beyond the tight end position. And this Marquise Brown is someone, talk about a potential league winner receiver. I just think it's Marquise Brown, maybe Will Fuller in the same conversation. Just have so little faith in Will Fuller, unfortunately, to even play 13 or 14 games, let alone 16. But those are the real difference makers to me beyond the wide receiver 1-2 range, where I'm very sad if I don't get one of Marquise Brown or Will Fuller in my drafts.
Hayden, let's have that Will Fuller conversation. I think it's time because he's going as we have him ranked as the wide receiver 28, and he's going around in that area of drafts. This is a player who is not being selected as a top 24 wide receiver. So you're not having to spend necessarily a pick that if it doesn't work out on someone that's going to tank your fantasy season. But if he does hit, his connection with Deshaun Watson is rare over a 16-game sample size. If he does hit, you're potentially looking at a top 15 wide receiver right now. There are questions there, but Hayden, isn't there something to the strategy of, while everyone is so focused on those injury concerns, instead look at the positives and look at the upside of what he could bring you if everything does go right?
Yeah, your league mates are definitely going to be looking at only the negatives here. And without DeAndre Hopkins, that frees up 10 targets per game. He's been a wide receiver 1 producer at times. So I think that it is worth clicking his name, especially if you've drafted three receivers in these first 2 or 3 tiers and then put the cherry on top with Will Fuller as your flex option. I love that strategy. 2 running backs, 3 established wide receivers, and then Will Fuller in your flex spot. That's how you can win the league.
Daigle, let's close the conversation with you. Make it a good name. Make it a good one to end on here, Daigle.
Okay. Hayden's going to get ready for fisticuffs because I am not leaving any draft without Mecole Hardman. And the argument he makes on behalf of Sammy Watkins and there just not being a role for Mecole Hardman is absolutely true. But I've seen through numerous studies on RotoViz and other sites that, as we know, targets aren't just handed down. They are earned. And this offense and this coach, Andy Reid, they are just far too smart to bend and keep Mecole Hardman benched for another year after being the most explosive receiver, arguably, in the league. So I believe that even in just drafting Mecole Hardman and stashing him for a month, that is basically what we did with Nick Chubb in his rookie year, just allowing something to happen in order to get one of the best offensive players in the entire league off the bench. And this is how you beat your league mates to fab in the bidding war you're going to have to do. Because if you're not doing it, if you're not drafting him, someone else is going to. And he's a potential league winner who I just can imagine earns his role eventually.
I have to do one quick rebuttal with this thing.
Me too.
The one other study I want to look at is if you're looking at low volume players that are young, yes, they do earn more targets, but you cannot extrapolate their efficiency numbers on a larger sample. So I did a study looking specifically for Mecole Hardman. He averaged 13 yards per target last year, which was by far the most in the league. We can expect him to be close to 9, not 13. So if you're trying to multiply hey, he's going to get 100 targets and then he's averaging 13 yards to target, that's where you lose me. And I think that's just kind of the game we're playing here, where you want to bet on talent, but you can't extrapolate. And we're pretending that as a top 50 fantasy receiver, that all these things are going to align. I get it. You want pieces of this offense. It's just getting a little price sensitive.
I just think we can't ignore when players are special as rookies. And that's what Mecole Hardman was. That's what Darius Slayton almost arguably was. People I feel like are overthinking both these players, people who lived up to their pre-draft skill sets and made huge plays consistently as rookies. And it'd be one thing if their ADPs were getting out of control. Like I thought Mecole Hardman's ADP would be one of those ones that got out of control this summer, and it just never happened. And there's so many reasons, it's easy to make the negative. Hayden made the negative case very eloquently. I mean, he's not going to average that many yards per target again, but just when a player is special as a rookie, like do not discount that. And, especially in this offense with Mecole Hardman and, the Chiefs, they made it clear they were willing to be rid of Sammy Watkins. The only reason he's back is because it was for the right price. They have faith in Mecole Hardman. And yeah, I would just implore people, do not overthink Mecole Hardman and do not overthink Darius Slayton so much.
There's a lot of other receivers we didn't even mention. I mean, I constantly bring up the rookies and Henry Ruggs and Jalen Reagor and Brandon Ayuk and CeeDee Lamb. I think even names in the slot like Tyler Boyd and Julian Edelman are being a little bit overlooked right now. But if you want to check out all of their rankings, you need to look at our premium products. Just go over to rotoworld.com/edge. We have all of our positional tiers. You can set up the scoring for your own league if it's a little specific, and we will spit out a big board for you to look at there. Again, that is rotoworld.com/edge. We have annual subscriptions and monthly ones as well. And if you want more conversations just like this, go over and check out the Rotoworld Football podcast as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.